If you are watching us in the United States, it's most likely on a local PBS station. Now, before President Trump pushed to slash federal funding for public media in the U.S., he complained that National Public Radio, NPR, as well as the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, were biased against him. Trump's beef with public media has resulted in Congress revoking $1 billion in funding, a decision that will hit the smallest stations in the biggest ways.
This is our CD library, which has been built over the years.
Scott Smith has been working at this small radio station in Monterey, Virginia for over a decade. He started as a news producer and is now the general manager of Allegheny Mountain Radio.
We give news, information, entertainment, weather reports, school closures, emergency alerts. We do lost and found pet notices. We do funeral announcements. We're very hyper-local, and we all share a common passion and a common pride for being here to provide those things for the community.
It's 1:16. We have 82 degrees and partly sunny skies.
Allegheny Mountain Radio is made up of 3 stations covering parts of Virginia and West Virginia. It offers vital information for the communities it broadcasts to, but that might change soon. Up to 65% of the radio's annual budget comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. With CPB effectively shutting down after losing federal funding, this radio station might soon share that fate.
What we'll be doing this coming year is sort of a transition year. We'll see where we can cut additional costs. We'll see if we can find additional forms of revenue, and we'll see where we stand at the end of this year and move ahead. Again, none of us are of the opinion that we're going to roll over and let this happen without a fight.
A fight that Scott is not battling alone. In nearby Bath County, we meet Danny Cardwell, the station coordinator from WCHG Radio that also belongs to the Allegheny Mountain Radio Cooperative.
NPR and PBS are going to be fine in their own ways. Will they look the same a couple years from now than they do now? Maybe not, but their existence will be solidified. They have products, they have productions, they have revenue streams that smaller stations just do not have.
After accusing NPR and PBS of spreading radical woke propaganda disguised as news, President Trump signed an executive order ending taxpayer subsidies to the 2 organizations. Congress later passed the cuts requested by Trump, despite warnings from some of its members.
We're not just putting PBS at risk here, we're putting millions of Americans who depend on local media for life-saving information. And what's in this rescission request is really making sure that public broadcasters don't have that ability, at least in 20 states where they have emergency plans.
Life-saving information also needed in the small communities where Allegheny Mountain Radio broadcasts, and where phone service is not always a given.
If the Wi-Fi doesn't work, my phone, the little things disappear and it says SOS on it, which means I cannot receive phone calls and I cannot make phone calls. So what ends up happening is the first thing we do is we tune into the radio to see, is there something happening in the area that we should be aware of? You can't get on Facebook if you don't have Wi-Fi. So that would be our only source of getting any communication and anything.
Scott is trying to educate the community about why public media is important and can be life-saving, but he's not sure their support will be enough to prevent a shutdown.
It would be a very, very sad thing if this station or any station were to be lost because of this, but I'm very afraid that that's going to happen. So.
Well, I'm joined now by my colleague Benjamin Alvarez Grübber. He helped report that story there in rural Virginia and West Virginia. He joins me now from our Washington Bureau. It's good to see you, Benjamin. We heard in your report that NPR and PBS should be able to weather the storm from these cuts. How far does this collateral damage really extend?
That's right, and that's also what we just heard from Danny there, that he says that NPR and PBS might look different, might have a different shape, changes in the programming, but it will be those local radio stations actually paying the price. It's hard to predict actually the extent of the collateral damage. There are some estimates, one of them by the president and CEO of NPR, Catherine Mayer, believes that as many as 80 NPR stations might face closure in the next year, while now there is an increase in donations from readers and viewers to support the mission of these smaller radio stations. That also was Scott, who we saw they profiled in that report, told us he was quite surprised by the huge number of emails and messages that he got, but that might decline soon. So there are already some attempts from for example, philanthropists to save these smaller stations that would not survive without government support. And one of them is called the Knight Foundation, that provides grants for the arts, journalism, research, and community development. They already committed nearly $37 million to provide this immediate relief to public media stations that are at risk of closing following the federal cuts to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, the CPB.
And Benjamin, is it fair to say that rural regions of the United States that could lose their radio lifelines, are these the same areas that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump?
So they are indeed some rural places, some rural towns where there is a huge support for Donald Trump. When we went there to Virginia, West Virginia, to file this report, we saw many of those signs for President Trump and for J.D. Vance there on the gardens. But there's also several polls showing that there is indeed a support by both Republicans and by Democrats when it comes to supporting federal funding for public radio. A recent poll said it's 66%. There are indeed some changes, 58% Republicans, 77% of Democrats. But it's not new that NPR and PBS have increasingly been accused by conservatives of being left-wing, of having a left-wing political bias, and also saying that this programming is quite woke. And that's something that President Trump and the White House are now also, for example, accusing the Smithsonian museums here in Washington, D.C. of.
We've got about a minute left. I want to just ask you, is there research out there? Is there data that looks at whether the president is correct about public media being biased?
So it's not only criticism from him, it's just several allies also who have been accusing NPR and PBS of leaning left politically and arguing that taxpayers' dollars should not be supporting that. There's actually one organization that is self-described a public benefit company, Advantes Media they're called, and they want to rate media for credibility and bias. They have, for example, placed PBS NewsHour under 10 points left of the ideological center, but they label it both reliable and also based in analysis and facts. For Fox and Friends, by contrast, popular morning show on Fox News is nearly 20 points to the right. So it shows that there are some polls showing that they're leaning to the left, but they're still being considered reliable facts.
Yeah, bias can be to the left and also to the right. Benjamin Alvarez Grübber. Benjamin, as always, thank you.